Welcome to our video service. We hope you enjoy the service as we offer praise and worship to the Lord Jesus Christ. If you live in the Crowthorne area, we would love to meet you. You can find the church next to the library in the middle of the High Street. The morning service starts at 10:30.
As you can see, we are continuing our series on Amos this morning. Good morning, by the way. Said that first. I don't know much about Amos. It's a good way to start, isn't it? But after Kevin's introduction of the series last week and a bit of research for today, I now know a little bit more about him than I did before. And I feel some affinity with him. Unlike many we see in the Bible, Amos was not a full-time preacher, a full-time prophet. I'm not a full-time preacher, as you'll have gathered already. Last week we heard from the first few chapters of Amos how he prophesied against many nations from the surrounding area before homing in on Israel. The original kingdom of Israel, by this time, the kingdom under David, had been split into two. The northern kingdom of Israel, which is where it seems most of Amos's focus was, although he himself was from the southern kingdom of Judah. Now I've got to grapple with this. Gosh, this is a bit worn out, isn't it? That seemed to have gone further than I wanted to. Where's the other one? Oh no, that's right. Okay. Amos's theme of pointing out the shortcomings of Israel and her neighbours is carried out in most of the 9 chapters of the book of Amos. But the theme of today is specifically on social injustice and oppression. And it's mostly in chapters 4 and 5, but it is all the way through the book. And Amos shows how you behave is really, and how you treat people is a pretty good indicator of your actual relationship with God, rather than what forms of worship you go through, what words you say to God, but it's what you actually do that seems to be the key thing. Chapters 4 and 5 obviously is a big chunk of text, so we're not going to go through all of that in detail, you'll be pleased to know, but we will look at a number of verses which highlight our theme, and we're going to especially focus on chapter 5, verses 18 to 24, where God, through Amos, says, "Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion, only to meet a bear. As though he entered his house and rested his hand on the wall, only to have a snake bite him. Will not the day of the Lord be darkness, not light, pitch dark, without a ray of brightness? I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." Strong words. Now, in those days, on the face of it, Israel was doing pretty well, certainly in political and economic terms. Their king, Jeroboam II, had extended his kingdom to regain control of the territories which had been lost since David's time. And surely that had to be a good thing, growth. He could also claim that the economy was meeting the elusive objective of growth. It seems that with territorial gains and economic growth, Jeroboam could easily have utilised the slogan, "Making Israel great again." Yet these achievements didn't seem pleasing to God, judging by the words we heard spoken through Amos. Now, as Kevin said last week, under the successful surface, much was wrong with the Israelite society. For instance, we can read in the second book of Kings, chapter 14, verse 24, that King Jeroboam did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, under his leadership, there was still some worship of the true God, but that wasn't going that well, as we'll see in a minute. But there was also a lot of worship of false gods, idols, most of them imported from the neighbouring countries. Often they involved rather disgusting rituals and practices. Over the years, God had sent many prophets to Israel, and now, under Jeroboam, it was time for their failings to be pointed out yet again. And Amos was the man tasked with doing it. The first part that I read, verses 18 to 20 of chapter 5, refer to the day of the Lord. Now, there are a few interpretations of what exactly that meant, but all of them imply victory for Israel, closeness of God to the country, and good things, really. But as we heard, Amos turned that all on its head. Basically, he said, you Israelites think that God coming closer to you will be a source of joy and light? Think again. God's pretty angry with you, and if he does come closer, you're going to be punished, not exalted. Verse 19 seems to be a couple of Hebrew equivalents of English's phrase, out of the frying pan into the fire. Just when you think you've solved your problems, you find things have actually got worse. Just as you think God is coming to rescue you from earthly opponents, you find he's come to punish you instead. I suppose that in some ways, for us, the nearest equivalent as Christians today would be if God was to say to us, why are you looking forward to the second coming of Christ? Do you think that's going to be a time of celebration and rejoicing? Think again. He's going to go through your failings and your shortcomings, and you're going to be punished accordingly. Now, that's not true, but it's how it would have sounded to the Israelites. Verses 21 to 23 are also pretty strong stuff. The Israelites probably thought they were doing okay. They went through the routines of God's holy festivals, brought their sacrifices and offerings, sang their worship songs, and played the sacred tunes. Why wasn't this pleasing to God? Well, there's probably a number of reasons why this wasn't accepted by God as satisfactory behaviour. It was all a bit superficial. They were going through the motions of worshipping and sacrificing to God, but their hearts weren't, it seemed, really in it. Because if they really understood what God wanted, they would have a clear focus on him. But instead they were also worshipping to loads of other so-called gods, which were worshipped by the nations around them. In theory, they were following their own true God, who demanded their soul worship, set clear standards of behaviour. In practice, they were trying to please other false gods as well, and with those gods, they'd adopted standards and behaviours of those other nations. So that's one reason God, through Amos, rejected their worship and sacrifice. But I think there's another major aspect of the Israelites' failings that comes through most forcefully in chapter 5, verse 24, which is probably the only one from Amos I would have recognised before I started preparing for today. God demands that Israel let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Yes, it was true the nation was becoming stronger and politically successful, and yes, the overall economy might have been booming. But it seemed that only those who were already well off were feeling the benefits. There's a number of verses in chapters 4 and 5 that illustrate these points. You can look them up yourselves. But for instance, in the very first verse of chapter 4, Amos says, "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks." Now, Bashan was apparently good farmland area, prime cattle country, renowned for quality livestock, but that's not really what Amos is talking about. What he's talking about, rather forcefully, is the rich women of Israel with a pampered lifestyle achieved through the exploitation of those less well off. In chapter 5, verses 11 to 13, Amos continues the accusations against the Israelites of imposing punitive taxes on the poor to fund the lavish lifestyle of the rich, and accepting bribes to favour the rich and deny justice to the poor. At the moment, our home group is studying James, and there's a lot of similarities between Amos and James, even though they wrote 800 odd years apart. In particular, James exposes the futility of faith without works. Chapter 2, verse 26, faith without deeds is dead. Israel in Amos's time may have been in an even worse state, with little faith, much of it misdirected, and few works, most of them selfish and unpleasing to God. So you can say it was all a bit of a mess. Worshipping false gods, half-hearted at best worship of the true God, exploitation of the poor to make the rich richer, sad behaviour from God's chosen people. Does it have any relevance for us as Christians today, living in the UK? Unfortunately, I think perhaps it can, in some ways anyway. But first, perhaps an idea to point out crucial differences between these days and Israel 750 years or thereabouts before the birth of Christ. There are obvious differences in many areas, such as technology. Israel in 750 BC had no mass communication. Some particularly pertinent things concern the interaction of state and religion. In Israel, the religious laws were effectively the state laws. The king, the hierarchy, and all the people were notionally expected to be following one God. Now, clearly from what we've read, they weren't doing it in practice, but theoretically, they were followers of God alone. Conversely, apart from Judah, the other half of the original kingdom under David, there were practically no people in other nations following the true God. Now, in the UK, we have a heritage of laws based largely on Christian principles. But Christians have no direct role in lawmaking just because they're Christians, apart from perhaps a few seats in the House of Lords, which also may not last that much longer, I suspect. Many ordinary Christians take little interest in political life. Many of them have a rather cynical view of politicians. However, there are a number of Christians in Parliament from various points on the political spectrum, and clearly we should seek to pray for them because they at times face really strong pressures on their faith. Nowadays, there are many Christians living in countries all around the world, unlike the Israelites' situation. But on the other hand, there's no exclusively Christian country. Probably the country with the most overtly Christian political activity is the United States of America. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. So, to take Amos's accusations against Israel and measure ourselves against them in respect to worshipping false gods. Well, as I've already said, we aren't a country of a single religion anymore, so we can say that's a charge that sits against the UK. But what about us as Christians? Well, hopefully none of us are engaged in a little bit of Baal worship on the side, or even, perhaps slightly more current, one of the pantheon of Hindu gods. But the failure of Israel, primarily, was that they were lured into the worship of the gods of their surrounding culture. Now, we're in a largely secular society, so the equivalent for us is probably things like consumerism, desire for status, perhaps our social media profile, as many others I'm sure you could think of. Can we really claim to be free from temptation, from any of those? Can we really claim never to succumb to temptation from any of those? The next accusation, if you like, from Amos was half-hearted worship, going through the motions without meaning it. God's got some very harsh words through Amos for the Israelites. Verse 21, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. In verse 23, away with the noise of your songs. No, I'm not going to say that, Phil. Don't worry. And indeed, I don't want to contemplate God reacting to any of our services or activities with words like these. Now, I will admit to sometimes losing concentration during a sermon. I expect you're all suffering from that one today. I will also admit to sometimes realising that I've enjoyed the tune, but not really registered the words. I'll also sometimes admit to sometimes being jolted with concern about whether I can really claim to have meant all the words that I've just sung. Now, all of these are regrettable and clearly shouldn't be. But I don't think they're the primary reason that God reacted to the Israelites' worship so forcefully, and they're not the main reason, I don't think, why we should be concerned about our own worship or services. I think the main reason for God's anger with the Israelites is in verse 24, where in contrast to the outward show of songs and sacrifices and everything else, God demands that they let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. How do Christians in 2025 rate on that measure? Well, it's difficult in some ways. The church, as we've already said, doesn't have the power held by the priests and hierarchy of Israel. As already mentioned, the church has limited power in political life or even a voice that's listened to. In addition, in putting forward a Christian view, we sometimes have to work against what seems to be a growing wave of bad news about appalling misbehaviour by Christian public figures. As individuals or as a small church, it's easy to feel powerless and perhaps therefore be inclined to give up. However, I think there are things we can do, both as individuals and as a church, which may not seem that much on their own, but collectively will start to make a difference and put us perhaps in the right position with God, or nearer to it anyway. Most local charities will gladly welcome additional volunteers. Depending on your skills, you might be able to help people needing transport, food, help with finances, a friend to chat with. For instance, the manager of a local care home recently appealed for people to come and visit their residents with a view to helping them build new friendships in what will be for them strange new surroundings. Alternatively, good neighbours who operate from the desk in our building are always on the lookout for new drivers. If perhaps you aren't able to get out and about, you might be able to write to your MP or other people in positions of power or influence to raise issues such as poverty, homelessness, question decisions which adversely affect the poor and marginalised. Many charities encourage people to write to their MPs about issues, and it's surprising how much notice MPs take of those letters. It's the people they need to vote them back in, after all. And it's perhaps more relevant than ever around here, because suddenly, what for nearly all of my life was a completely safe seat, no longer is a safe seat for any one party, and therefore candidates are going to be particularly keen to hear what their constituents might have to say. Our church premises, I'm pleased to say, are used by a number of charitable organisations, and we're able to contribute financially to organisations helping people in need both locally and worldwide. We've contributed by extending our eco status to silver. That helps to reduce pollution levels, which makes a contribution to reducing the severity of climate change. That in itself helps many in poorer countries who are themselves unable to take sufficient measures to cope with the drastically altered weather patterns and rising sea levels, which even threaten to remove some island countries from the map completely. But that award covers other things like being more careful what products we buy to avoid supporting organisations which exploit their workforce. That provides real help to the underprivileged in many countries, and it's something we can all do a bit in that area in our home lives as well, by being careful what we buy. Another avenue to think about is that there's always a need for financial support, for aid charities, which can be a way to support the needy who are further afield. Having said that, there's a surprising level of struggling people in Crowthorne. The communion collection, as we've heard, is for the food bank, the Crowthorne Food Bank. Many people are surprised to hear that there's a food bank in Crowthorne, yet it's heavily used. And the local MP says that Crowthorne is the ward with the second highest level of deprivation in his constituency. A lot of you, or some of you anyway, will know one of our grandchildren is of mixed race. And it worries me that he will be seen as a potential problem by some, including, sadly, some in authority, simply because of the colour of his skin. Others may be regarded as a threat because of the clothes they wear, being perceived as a sign of a certain lifestyle or belief system. We need to speak up when people make judgments based on appearance rather than actions. The church can use its voice to raise issues of concern, to organise activities, host public events, give a voice to those who can't get their voices heard otherwise. I could go on for some time, but I think I will stop there. I'll then therefore end with the challenge that we should do enough in our ordinary lives to ensure that we don't undermine the proclamation of our faith, and to issue a reminder that God will see through our external facade to what's really in our hearts, our minds, and our souls. And that's a scary thought.
If you have been using a computer to view this service, you can help us to grow this channel by doing 3 things. Please press the like, subscribe and the bell. This will get you a notification of when we post our next service. It will also help us grow within the YouTube community. Thank you.